Okay, now we're on? All right. This is the board policy meeting for January 15th. Has the meeting been properly posted, Lynn?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Opportunity for citizens to speak, we have none, and bright lights, we have none. But we do have some action items this evening. The first one of which is the minutes. By the way, Barbara is excused tonight. She's got a situation to deal with. Diane?
I move that the minutes be approved as presented.
I will second that. Any questions or changes to be made? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 2-0, Lynn.
Thank you.
Okay. We do have action items here. It's excuse me. It's two policies, but they're related, and it deals with the way whether we will be changing the way we deal with the approval of policies. And we've given some talk to this previously. Joe and I and Lynn have met on it, and I would like Joe, if you want to give us some background for Diane. Sorry.
So from a process standpoint, the district has a two-reading policy or two-reading process before a policy can be reviewed. The policy committee also meets and reviews those policies twice. So really, we're at a four-reading approval process for any policy, and that. If we were dealing with one or two policy changes at a time, that would be, quite all right. I mean, we have the ability to expedite policy approval or approval if we need to by waiving the second reading, so on and so forth. But what we've, in the last 2 years, when we began to work with the NEOLA Policy Service, we've really found that we get three types of policies. We have policies that are brand new to the school district. We get policy revisions from them, so current policy that needs to be tweaked in one way, shape, or form. And then those types of policies require some work through to make sure that they fit the needs of the school district of Waukesha. And some examples of that would be grading policies, policies that have to do with fees collections and things like that. We also have policies that no matter what we do in the district or what we feel, in order to be compliant with those policies, they're policies that come from the state and federal government, you have to adopt the changes as presented. So if the board tweaks it, they can tweak it, but they're not going to remain in compliance with what the state or the federal government is saying. And an example of that is the food service policy that we've gone around with, where there's updates from the USDA that you have to put into the food service policy, or compliance pieces to the FMLA policies or the Fair Labor Standards Act, things that get changed in Washington or things that get changed in Madison where they just get handed down to you and you have to adopt them. So in order to handle this number of policies, usually NEOLA will generally present us with two policy updates a year, one in the fall and one in the winter. Those two policy updates generally have 40 to 50 new policies. We get those policies, we do a review with our NEOLA consultant, we then bring those policies to the various departments in the district, we work those policies through, and then we bring them to committee. And then it takes 2.5 months to get them approved. So what we're looking to do is to try to expedite that process a little bit. We want to maintain board and committee oversight over all of the policies, because policy creation and adoption is one of the key foundational pieces of a board of education. But based off of what we're getting, and now working with NEOLA for 2 years, we're taking a look at how we propose policies. So if you look at this first bylaw, 0131.1, we're looking at breaking out the approval process for the three types of policies that we're getting. And you can see in the middle of the page there, items 1, 2, and 3, which essentially the policy stays, to a two-reading format, but all federal and state law and bylaw and policy legal updates shall be amended or repealed at any meeting of the policy committee. So the responsibility for these policies is at the committee level, not the whole board. Provided the proposed amendment or repeal shall have been proposed at a previous policy committee, so this gets us 2 readings, and once proposed, shall have remained on the agenda of each policy committee until approved or rejected. So it means that the policy committee will entertain and approve all legal updates. And again, going back to what is required in a legal update, if it's a legal update, we must adopt it so that our policy remains in compliance with what the law says. The second area then, or the second item number 2, all newly proposed bylaws and policies of the board shall be adopted or amended at any meeting of the board. So this is where the whole Board of Education then has the authority, provided the proposed adoption or amendment shall have been proposed at a previous board meeting, and once proposed shall have remained on the agenda of each succeeding board meeting until are approved or rejected. So this is for any new policy to the district. So say, for instance, we wanted to create a policy on wearing red shoes to school. That's a new policy for the school district of Waukesha. That would then go to the whole board twice. So we would come through committee with it, and then we would go to the whole board, and we would let the board vote on the red shoe policy for the school district of Waukesha. And then the third area, all bylaw and policy revisions shall be amended or repealed at any meeting of the policy committee until are approved or rejected, and then proposed at the succeeding board meeting and remain on the agenda until approved or rejected. So for this area then, if I were to bring to you a policy update, say for instance, we are updating the grading policy for the school district of Waukesha, if this committee approves that amendment to the policy, that item then would have been approved once. That would be the first reading for it. And then at the following meeting of the Board of Education, we then would have that policy go forward to the whole board where it could then be approved, and the board meeting then would be the second reading of the policy. And so the reason that we're doing this again is the volume of policies that get minor tweaks or legal updates that based off of what is in those policies, we feel that the committee could approve. And then for anything that's new that would substantially change or that would change or impact how we're operating as a district based off of what the board is telling us to do through policy, we then would have the whole board entertain those policies. So I bring this forward to you as just a proposed change to this process, because what's happening is we are not able to get all of our policies approved in a timely manner before another update comes to us. And so we're trying to find a way to expedite this process to still give the board and the committee the oversight over policy, not to try to, do anything that, try to fast track things, but just to try to create some efficiencies in how we adopt policy. And I would, go back, my first few years in Waukesha, 4 and 5 years ago, when we were still, prior to working with NEOLA, the policy committee didn't meet as frequently. We were not as up to speed as a district on policy adoption. We weren't always aware of what the changes were. And it was very hard to do that, because a law would pass and nobody's informing you of that the law passed. So what we're trying to do is we now have these updates. They're coming in a timely manner. We want to get those policies approved in a timely manner, and therefore we're bringing this change forward to you.
Right. And I think those last comments were good. The changes we started making several years ago were very positive. They have increased the workload, I guess you could put it that way, but with good reason. We're getting information that is important to us quicker, and we're getting information that we didn't always get. But it increased the workload significantly and slowed down the process too much. And I think what we're trying to do here makes a lot of sense. And I know Joe and I have talked about it previously. And for anybody that happens to be listening or watching, or Diane, myself, I think it's important on what we're looking at here, Diane. The lines up near the top, the 3 or 4 red lines, they basically have been reworded and brought down into numbers 1 and 2. Changing only as to whether it's a board or a committee that's dealing with it. So that process continues to exist either at a committee level or board level rather than always at both levels. And basically, number 2 is continuing exactly the way we're doing things today, right?
Yeah, number 2 is how we are addressing all policy updates right now.
Yeah.
By two meetings of the whole board and 2 meetings at committee. And that process is, it's slowing things down
a lot.
a lot.
Yeah.
By the time Lynn and I have a chance to meet with the departments in the school district, the assistant superintendents, to review the policy updates in their area, by the time we get those together, we have tried to parse those out so that we're not bringing 40 or 50 approval items to the whole board.
Good idea.
We could fill 3 pages, 4 pages of the board agenda with policy updates during some periods. So we're trying to avoid that and stay current. The other option would be to do our work on the front end, bring 40 or 50 changes to committee, then to the whole board, then to committee, and then the whole board, and do it all at once. I don't think that does the policies the service that they need. And I don't think that it's giving the board the opportunity to pay attention to those things that really stand out as items that we need to pay attention to. Policy updates, especially policy updates for things that are very specific to Waukesha, those things require a tremendous amount of scrutiny by the Board of Ed, because that really is, this is Waukesha, this is how we're doing it, this is how grading affects us, this is how attendance affects us. Things like English language learners turning into English learners doesn't really require that level of scrutiny by the board, because it's a federal change to how we identify students who once were English language learners and are now English learners. Those technical things are things that we should be able to get through quicker.
Diane?
So that would be something under number 1.
That would be.
The state and federal bylaw.
Right.
And my question is, there's no vote necessary at the board level, but will it be like just an information item for them to know?
The policy chair would have a narrative that would talk about all of the policy updates with a brief description. So, English language learner policy number whatever has been changed to English language learners. This was an update that came to us through the ESSA from the federal government. We would just give very short bullets that in this
report
case,
out.
Bill, to report out
There
to
would
the
be a
board. So the whole
report
board
out.
would be made aware of it.
That's a good question, because one of the things we don't want to do is leave anybody to thinking that we're trying to bypass the full board.
Right.
We will advise the board of those changes, and they certainly have the ability to dig deeper on any one that would be troubling to them if they read everything.
And one of the things that I would propose, if this policy is adopted, or this bylaw is changed as it's written, one of the things that I would propose this coming spring with the board is going from a 3-member policy committee to a 5-member policy committee. That way you would have more representation when talking about these federal and state updates, when you'd have more people to weigh in on any policy revisions that come through. That way we could, collectively the board would have a little bit more voice at the committee level, similarly to how they do it for teaching and learning, for compensation and HR, for finance and facilities. Those are 5-member committees, and they have a little bit more voice around the topics that are being presented.
And I don't believe that it's a policy issue as to whether we have 3 or 5. I believe that's up to the president.
Board president's discretion, yes. Because this committee, up until this year, was a 5-member committee as we went
For a couple
through the
years it was,
NEOLA
yeah.
work.
There's something else I was...
Think
But you
that
go-
change should
go ahead.
happen sooner rather than like at the beginning of the next year kind of process?
I think that by proposing this change right now, by the time this would eventually get adopted by the whole board, it would coincide with the April elections and then the May board reorganization, as you do every year.
So the May reorganization would be when that would go into effect.
Right, and so this policy then could go
be
into
ideal.
effect at the same time that the board is reorganized.
I think that's the point I was going to just ask or confirm on, because you and I have talked about. under the third grouping, basically, we've taken all of our policies and broken into 3 different categories. And in the third category, we don't have to have 2 readings at the full board, is that correct?
Correct. The third category then would be, there would be an approval at the policy committee meeting. And then, if there was approval, so say the policy committee approves this, by majority vote or by unanimous vote, then it would go to the board. And if the board then approved it, then on a majority vote, then the policy would go into place. If the board said we want more time to look at this, then the board can always table whatever item is on there to get more information or to have something.
That's the way that is worded, and remain on the agenda until approved or rejected.
Correct.
So they do still have the option of a second reading.
Correct. Correct. And then, it's similar to any policy that we have in place right now. It just because we had it on a committee, a board, a committee, and then back to the board, doesn't mean the board can't say at that second reading, we want to table this for further research.
Correct.
We want to, and then to extend the approval process if they so wish.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, I think those are the only questions I had on this, Diane. Did you have anything that's troubling you on this?
No, it makes sense.
Makes perfect sense, right? Isn't that strange when that happens?
So is this a NEOLA recommended kind
Well,
of
this is
change or just
no.
our internal?
Internal.
Lynn and I, and I'll get to it in a few minutes, Lynn and I had a meeting with NEOLA, and I'll update you on under number 4 as to how we came to this recommendation.
So, this is being presented to us as an action item this evening, and we have only the 2 of us here. So if you are interested in making the motion, you can do so.
I make a motion to take a look at the revisions to policy number 0131.1 for bylaws and policies as presented.
I'm going to ask you to think about the words you used, to take a look at.
Oh, okay. That I recommend approval of
Thank you.
the revisions as presented.
Okay, thank you. And I will second that. And I have no further questions, do you?
No.
Then all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
So that has, opposed, there were none. That 0131.1 is approved to take to the board next month.
Thank you. We
have a backup to that policy, there's a relationship to that policy on 0155, which this is a policy we've had in a place that talks about what the committees are, and if you go to the second page of that, what items committees can make the final approval of. So if 01, what was that other number? 31? Yeah. 0131.1, if that is to be approved, there would be an adjustment to policy 0155, which would be just changing the wording from the policy can approve none to the policy, excuse me, the committee can approve none to the committee can make the approvals for all federal and state bylaw and policy legal updates, which is our first category. So I would have, it follows one after the other.
Right, and just, a little bit more on that, the board has to delegate authority to a committee through a bylaw, which would give the committee the final say on something. And so if you look at the other committees where Finance and Facilities has the final say on transportation, facility rentals, so on and so forth, and in Teaching and Learning has final say on student trip requests, grant proposals, scope and sequence, curriculum revisions, et cetera. This then would be a statement of delegation from the Board of Education to the Policy Committee to approve federal and state bylaw and policy legal updates.
Questions, Diane?
As I'm looking at 0155, and it lists the committees and where the president shall appoint to different things, something like the TIF is not listed, TIF districts, should that be included, or is that as needed?
It's not a board committee.
Okay.
Well, was your question about
Other
Having
president,
such a committee, or
well, just the president appointing people to represent us in different kind of contexts. And it
that's
lists
on
the
the-
TIF board in the examples underneath, but doesn't list it in the president shall appoint the following.
You were to, so if you're looking on the first page, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those are examples, I guess.
Yep. But those are things that would encompass the TIF situation that you're referencing.
And where would the legislative committee that the superintendent is trying to organize right now, does that need to be addressed here, or is that just an other?
If it's going to be a standing committee of the board, it should be, I guess it depends on how we want to use.
He told us it would not be a standing committee of the board.
Like an advisory, temporary as the budget's being approved, et cetera.
Yeah, but I mean, policy used to meet in that same vein. Technology meets in that same vein where it's not a monthly meeting, it's
No,
almost.
but I think Todd's point was there wouldn't be any, why did he talked about that. There wouldn't be any decisions that would have to come to the board. We can have him discuss that further for.
Yeah, I will,
for this.
I'll talk to Todd about
Wanna
that.
do that?
I mean, if we're running into a situation where a group of board members is gonna meet, we have to decide if that passes, goes through that open meetings law requirement.
Okay, right.
That'd be my point, is like, is this just a,
We should use that test that we passed a month or two ago in policy to determine if that constitutes an open meeting, and if we would want to then have that as a formal committee.
Okay, so that's still open. I would say we wouldn't have to include that as to whether we have an action on this one tonight, but it's
no.
something for us to look at in the future. Are
right,
you okay with that?
I'll talk to Todd about that.
okay.
Yeah, okay. So,
And even in the situation where if we would all go to Madison to do a lobbying day, that would have to be posted as an open meeting. Experience? Or even if two of the three of us go.
It depends, and if there's gonna be board business, I mean, the WASB Day at the Capitol, I don't know how we've handled that in the past, outside of maybe perhaps doing a statement that says board members are gonna be attending this.
that may
and
be
they're
as
not
far
gonna
as
be
we've ever
discussing-
gone.
We're not gonna be discussing business of the board. That would be very similar to how we get together for our holiday,
Okay,
where board members are gonna be together, but they're not discussing business of.
Something wrong? Oh, maybe closer to your microphone.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was sidetracking.
No problem.
Oh, it's a question, it's something that we should pursue, but we'll take that up in a future discussion of this policy. So again, if you would be interested in making approval on just the item that we've done on page 2.
Yes, I make the motion that we approve the revisions to policy 0155 on committees, specifically identifying that the policy committee would have jurisdiction over all federal and state bylaw and policy legal updates.
Thank you, and I will second that. Further questions on 0155? Seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 2-0, Lynn. And that gets us through those action items. We have no information items. You are going to share with us an update on what's going on with our NEOLA connection?
So Richard, Lynn and I are going to be meeting tomorrow morning. We had a meeting before the winter break, and we reviewed about 45 policy updates at that time. A couple new policies for the board, a bunch of updates that are legal and technical in nature that don't really change what the policy is saying outside of a word or two, similar to that English language learner policy. By the time we finally got around to meeting with Richard this past December, based off of what our approval process was before then, we wanted to get through, you want to get through a policy update before you entertain the next policy update. we were butting up against the next release. And so the next release came out today. So it did not pay for us to entertain a bunch of policies that may be already requiring revision. So that's what Lynn and I are going to do tomorrow, and which is the reason why we wanted to propose this change to the bylaw and to how the committee operates now, because in essence, if Richard comes tomorrow with another 40 policies, we'd have 85 to 90 policies that we would need to put our eyes on. And we're okay doing that administratively.
Yes.
But I know what that looks like in the scope of a meeting. You know, when the policy section on the board agenda is long, and policy is at the end of a meeting that has already had a lot of heavy topics on it,
Yes.
you're now asking the board to pay attention through 30 updates that I don't necessarily know if it's fair to people to do that at the end of a meeting. Likewise, if policy is at the beginning of the meeting, and you go through 30 updates, and then the board has to entertain other business. I don't necessarily know if it's fair to the board members in that situation to have to pay attention to something that is so detailed and technical on the front end, and then something that might be, you know, heavily debated, like the, what did we talk about a lot at the, through the summer this past year, the resolution idea.
Resolution,
or when we were talking
something-
about
something-
passing the
one of them about cell
referendum.
phones and stuff like that. we
Cell
ought to
phone stuff,
discuss,
yeah. So what we're trying to do then, all of that led into, let's see if we can expedite this process so the committee can do some work and approve some things that don't require major changes to how we're doing it, that are just very technical in nature. And then let's parse down the things that the full board has to approve, because those things would be things that, as a Board of Education, a 9-member board, you're telling administration how you want us to operate. And we really want you guys to pay attention to those pieces. So
So the timing is perfect to
the
bring this.
timing, it all works out, it all works out very well. You know, it's our hope that we can, you know, have our meeting with Richard tomorrow to take a look at what we need to bring forward to the board to begin working within the departments. And so that by the time these bylaws, if the board accepts them as changes, we would also be at the same time working through and approving the updates to the book, so that at the end of this year, we have an updated policy manual that then will carry us into the summer and next school year.
And thought came up while you were talking about that too, and maybe Diane was wondering about this as well. The way we've been doing policies with the two, actually ultimately 4 potential readings and meetings, there is nothing that says that is the way it has to be done, and NEOLA does not have that as a practice. So
Oh, there's
it's rather
another-
almost unique to us.
There's nothing in state law that says you have to have 2 readings to approve every policy. It's good practice to give people an opportunity to take a look at something and then come back, but I don't believe that there's anything in law that says you have to do it twice. It's a good practice for boards. But that being said, a lot of boards treat it as a different practice. They may have a policy meeting, you know, an hour before the board meeting, and the policy committee votes on those updates, and then the board votes on those updates. And that's one way of tackling it. Another way of doing it is the way we're proposing to do it, to go through committee at one meeting and then the whole board at the next. So we have some flexibility as to how we want to treat this. Some boards have had just say, there's the NEOLA recommendations. We're going to approve the update number 50, and then all in favor say aye, and then whatever is in item number 50 or policy update number 50, the administration goes ahead and implements, and the board doesn't then, you know, approve each individual policy. I think that this is kind of a nice, this proposal is kind of a nice blending of all of those types of ideas that creates some efficiencies for our school district.
Well, and like you said earlier, one of our primary responsibilities as a board is the policies. So we should be paying attention to them and not just giving it rhetoric and saying, we'll pass it. Wrong word. You know what I mean? Okay. Anything else? Diane? Recommendations for future committee meetings or anything else that's...
I think you have a lot of them in store for us without having to recommend anything.
You guys are going to be busy.
Yeah, happy. If he comes in with all those policies, okay.
I've got the cure for insomnia. It's coming up here pretty soon.
Okay, anything else on your end?
Nope, we're good.
Then we will stand adjourned. Our next policy committee meeting would be February 19th at 4 PM. And I imagine we'll have some work to do that night.